13th gate. The 13th gate is the fellowship of man, and it's one of the roll gates in the G Center. And it is a roll gate of the openness in our interaction with the other. If you look at the very first line of the 13th gate, and remember that when we're looking at any kind of hexagram and we want to be able to understand its basic nature, that the first thing to do is to look at the first line, because the first line represents its foundation, and the foundation of the 13th gate is empathy. And this gives you a clear idea of the role that this plays in the overall nature of the being. It's also something to understand about the genetic continuity that exists through roll gates and how helpful they can be in understanding the nature of our personality and the way in which our purpose can be fulfilled through our profile. When you look at the position of the Sun, Earth, and you look at their lines, you're looking at 70% of the imprinting. So if you're looking at your own design and you happen to be a first-line personality, let's say that you're somebody that is a 1-3 profile, then one of the things that you understand about yourself out of that immediately through the genetic continuity to this roll gate is a recognition that you are basically empathic, and that the first line carries an empathic quality. After all, the first line is about investigation. The first line is about introspection. It's about building a solid foundation. And of course, you cannot do that unless you're open to information, unless you're open to the other. So the thing to recognize from the beginning about the nature of the 13th gate, it is a gate that takes things in. It is a memory gate. More than just a memory gate, this is the gate of the listener. And as a listener, there is always the potential that you get to hear things that other people don't hear. You get access to information that other people don't have access to. And everything about the nature of the abstract process in the 13th gate is part of the channel of the prodigal, the design of the witness. And so the 13th gate, in its listening, in its potential of empathy, to be able to be open to the other, to take things in, that ultimately has the potential to feed our ability to reflect, to feed our ability to be able to remember with relative accuracy. And when I say relative accuracy, I'm saying relative because this is a subjective process. That is, we're dealing with an abstract circuit, and in dealing with the abstract circuit, what is remembered is subjective. And yet the very subjectivity, in and of itself, is not a negative. In other words, it represents a unique, differentiated information, secrets, if you will, that ultimately, when reflected upon, can reveal something of great value to the collective and can be shared with the collective. After all, the roll gates in the G Center all have a direct connection to the throat. Each and every one of these rolls has a potential to express themselves, at least through articulation, and to be recognized for that, in that they are basically projected elements, that is the G to the throat center. So when we're looking at the 13th gate, we are looking at universal ideals and values in an ordered framework which inspires humanistic cooperation. Universal ideas and values in an ordered framework. And this is really the responsibility of the 13th gate. It's harmonic gate. The 33rd gate is a gate of remembering. It is a gate of revelation. It is the articulating potential in the throat. But it is the fundamental role of the 13th gate to keep on taking information in. And in taking those all that information in, being able to find a way to codify that information so that it can be used for the value of others. In other words, there is a very important collective value in this fellowship. It's also something to think about, that the 13th gate is the only gate that by its very nature is dependent on taking in information shared by the other in order to benefit both itself and the other. So there is a quality of openness here that is very, very important. And it's also important to be able to see its continuity in terms of its line value and its relationship to your own design, to understand the way in which you are open to the other. And in living out your strategy, in honoring your inner authority, to be able to discover that not only is that truly the way in which you are open to the other, but how much value that brings when you're operating correctly through the fellowship of man. Possession in great measure. The 14th gate. In the traditional I Ching, this is the seventh gate is the army. And the seventh gate sits in the Chi center, so it is part of the identity in our design, and the seventh gate is part of our direction in this life. It's one of the expressions of our potential direction in life. Remember that when we're dealing with the Chi center, we're dealing with two basic themes, a theme of love and a theme of direction. The seventh gate is part of the right angle configuration of the Sphinx, which is about direction. More than that, the seventh gate is really important for us in understanding thematically lines in other gates through genetic continuity. That is, the seventh gate is a role gate. And as a role gate, it sets archetypal themes for each of the 6 variations of the lines. So that when you're looking at the seventh gate, you're looking at the gate of the role of the self in interaction. And it is this logical role, because this is part of a logical circuitry. So the army really represents the role that the collective can take on to lead, and to lead the collective in an organized fashion. So when you're looking at the seventh gate, you're really looking at these primary roles. Now remember, role gates are very important when you want to really understand line themes. So when you're looking at the seventh gate and you look at its 6 lines, you are really seeing the archetype of what are the 6 roles of collective leadership. There's the authoritarian, the first line, the democrat, the anarchist, the abdicator, the general, and the administrator. And so when you're looking at the seventh gate, you're really seeing this, the archetype, the real structure of what collective leadership can be all about. Now, obviously, it's very different for somebody who has the seventh gate defined, that is, has it defined in the sense that it's active, that it's in a defined G center, then the role is always consistently coming out. What is more difficult is for those, of course, who have this gate active in an open G center. You know, the strategy, the not-self strategy of the open G center is always to be looking for love and always to feel like they are lost in their direction, which means that they're not certain about the nature of the role. Even though the role itself has a genetic potential that's imprinted in them, the fact that the center is undefined means that it operates inconsistently. You know, if they're a second line and they are designed to be a Democrat and they have an open G center, well, they're only going to be democratic in certain situations. And it's only through the activation of the G center by somebody else that they're even going to have the opportunity to be able to express that role. And it goes back to understanding something fundamental about the nature of a gate. The fact that you have a gate active, that you have to see that there's many different parameters around that activity. You know, is it active and operating? Is it part of a defined center? Is it active, but it is in a dormant state because the center is open and it's waiting to express itself through conditioning? And even more than that, is the gate being activated by the conscious or the unconscious? You know, are you able to participate consciously in the process of that, or is this something that is coming out of your unconscious? Somebody who is an authoritarian, somebody who is a 7-1, their role, what they're here to express in this life is their authority. But that's very different coming from the personality, because you're aware of it. You recognize that you're acting like an authority, and thus you're prepared for the response of others who may resist your authority. But if that first line of the 7 is coming out of the unconscious, you don't know, you're not consciously participating in your authoritarianism. You may not be aware of the tone that you're using. And as a direct result, you can end up upsetting people not knowing why they're upset and getting into situations that are very difficult and losing your power to be able to lead them, the potential of being able to lead them. If you go to the harmonic gate, On the other side of the channel from the 7, you have the 31, you have the gate of influence, and together they form this channel of the alpha, for good or bad, the design of leadership. So the 7th gate is fundamental for us. After all, we are operating in what is inherently a logical environment, and that the future for us is governed by our capacity to understand the formulas and to be led along the line of correct formulas in order to be able to survive into the future. We need our correct leaders. We need those out of the 7th gate who are going to operate correctly as themselves and thus be able to provide for the collective. The 13th gate. The 13th gate is the fellowship of man. And it's one of the roll gates in the G Center. And it is a roll gate of the openness in our interaction with the other. If you look at the very first line of the 13th gate, and remember that when we're looking at any kind of hexagram and we want to be able to understand its basic nature, that the first thing to do is to look at the first line, because the first line represents its foundation, and the foundation of the 13th gate is empathy. And this gives you a clear idea of the role that this plays in the overall nature of the being. It's also something to understand about the genetic continuity that exists through